So, welcome to another session in our series of conversations about autonomous Postgres. Today's guest, Magnus Hagander, is a real pillar of the open source database world. He's been a member of the PostgreSQL core team for many, many years and president of PostgreSQL Europe. He spent over 2 decades shaping what today is undisputably the #1 open source relational database in the world. One of the very first projects that he got known for was the Windows port of PostgreSQL, which I think, Magnus, you did together with Bruce, right? Um, so,
And don't forget also there was one more guy
who
who
was,
we have mostly not. I don't think we've seen him since. He worked on that port, and then we never saw him again. But
okay.
he did a lot of work that. For the moment, his name just escapes me. But I remember he was in Sydney, Australia. So we were sort
Oh,
of
okay.
perfectly spread out around the globe.
All right. Well, I
The
did
three
not
of us
even
who did.
know
I mean,
that.
there were other people as well, but there were three
Mhm.
people who did a lot of the
Yeah.
work.
That was certainly a very important contribution to making Postgres as popular as it is today. And from then on, I think you've been working a lot in security, obviously in the core team, the infrastructure of the project. So your fingerprints are really all over the place in Postgres. So thank you very much for joining me today. Thanks, Magnus.
Thank you.
So, as usual, we have a number of questions, or I have a number of questions. And the very first one would be, so there's a lot of discussion about autonomous Postgres or autonomous database, as Oracle calls it, as a label to either augment or even replace the DBA. So in many tasks such as tuning, vacuum configuration, even schema design, where do you see the biggest opportunity specifically for Postgres?
So I think the biggest community are more in the area of tuning and uh, maybe not as much schema design, but eventually at a point of data model design to a level and sort of query building. Whereas the schema design itself, I think is, I mean, there's opportunities there, but I think they are much closer and they are bigger in the other areas.
Okay, very interesting. So when we try to draw the line between the AI recommending something or even just analyzing data to find a root cause on the one side, on the other side, the AI actually doing something autonomously. How do we draw that line? Where should it be? What does it depend on where that line should be?
Yeah, I think that's a very debated point right now. Right? A lot of or a lot of people in the traditional DBA role that I, as a consultant, meet out with our clients and things like they would say the AI should never touch anything. Right? It's okay to give recommendations, but there needs a person needs to do it. Right? And then you got a whole group of other sides coming from maybe less of the pure database experience, but experience elsewhere who are like, we just want this to be magic and work. And in reality, the point is somewhere in between, as it usually is, right? And exactly where it is, I think, probably depends also very much on the organization. I think where we are today, at least much of what we can do with it today, it can be an excellent job or an excellent tool for, as you say, to augment the DBA, to make the DBA's job easier, to maybe push back the limit if you're a small startup and you don't have a DBA. You
Mhm.
might push the limit to when you need to get yourself a DBA much further out, right? Because it can help with a lot. But I think at some point, again, with the levels of technology that we have today, at least, at some point you're gonna want to still have a DBA in there, but the DBA's task is probably going to change. And it has already done. Like, I mean, compare a DBA now to a DBA in, I don't know, the early 90s. Like, tasks were very different. A lot of the things that DBAs did back then, the database does today. Right? And in a way, I think this is just an evolution of that.
Okay. So it's a little bit like the autonomous car, which kind of started with, I don't know, distance control and speed control, etc. Went from there to parking aids, and then from there to, driving in traffic jams, and finally now in limited areas to an autonomy level 4. So you would compare a little bit to that.
It's the same kind of evolution, yeah.
Mhm. Okay,
I mean, if
great.
you go even further back, you look at databases basically prior to when we were doing SQL and stuff, right? Good ISAM stuff. The DBA did even more, right? You decided in which order you should be scanning things in your application and stuff, right?
Yeah.
You
Okay.
can sort of go all the way back there and see that we've moved more and more of the decision making of how to do things into the database, and now AI and machine learning and all these things are another tool in the toolbox to move more things in there so that the developers and the DBAs can focus on more productive things.
Great. So, and that's a good lead into my next question, which is like we're looking at Postgres itself, the planner, for example, becoming more and more intelligent, right? Um, how does that influence the scope of what a tuner does, whether they're an AI tuner or a human tuner?
I mean, I think in the ideal situation, right, you wouldn't need an AI tuner or a human tuner at all. Right? The database would just magically do everything right. And I think that's part of what's in this idea of the autonomous database is really moving that role, whether an AI based or a human based, well, into the database, and you can't move the human into the database. But if you have an AI based tuner, if it lives in the database, it lives in the planner and optimizer, it lives in there, it can know more and it can act sort of quicker and more isolated, right? So I think sort of if we're looking at the idea of an autonomous database, that's the direction that we're moving in. But there are many steps to get there, and in true sort of Postgres fashion, you'll probably start with things that live outside of the database, and then compete outside the database, and eventually Postgres will absorb some of it. Some of it might be absorbed as pure functionality. Some of it might be absorbed in the form of adding additional hooks and things into planners and optimizers that can interact with an external tool that's based on uh, some sort of AI ML technology. It may not be an LLM style AI, which is all the rage today, but AI.
Okay, very interesting. Yeah. So, assuming that AI will help us make Postgres easier to use, right? We have these multiple dimensions. We have analysts kind of using Postgres and struggling with having to write SQL or complex SQL like window functions, etc. And on the other side, we have DBAs who, just like we discussed now, would get help in analyzing root cause analysis, making recommendations. If you look forward to the next couple of years, what do you think is going to become real? What's your prediction?
I mean, I think we'll see movement in both of those areas and kind of independent movements, right? I think we're already starting to like in the tools that the data analysts use. They are, I think, a closer match for the LLM style AI to help them and say, yeah.
Hmm.
I mean, even those of us who've done it for a long time sometimes struggle with, how do I combine these four different window functions with a grouping set somewhere and stuff like that. And LLMs are really good at producing, helping you do that, right?
Hmm.
So I think there is a lot of opportunity in the tooling space for the people who are working on those things. And then, of course, through direct connections, they might not even have to see the SQL. The LLM will just run it for them and give them what they wanted or produce whatever there. Whereas in the pure sort of backend side of the database side, I mean, you can do weird things with LLMs. You can do a lot of things with LLMs, but there's a lot of other things happening in the AI and machine learning space that I think might be more suitable for some of the things there. What I'm hoping to see, and I think I'm seeing some movements in the direction, is more dynamicness to come in from it. That is like not the if you got a DBA who's tuning the system, they're not tuning the system all the time. Like
Ah, okay.
very few organizations have a DBA that sits in front of the database, looks at all the numbers all the time, and then changes configuration parameters every 15 minutes. I'm sure there is an organization out there that does that, but that's definitely the outlier, right? And
Yeah.
if this is handled by an AI sitting much closer into the system and having a whole different kind of cost benefit model, being able to do these things at a much higher rate and observing changes and patterns in the systems and reacting to that, I think is to me that's the most exciting development around this. That'll being able to do things that realistically we just like a human can't do that. I mean, they can, but it'll never be efficient.
Okay. Yeah. Very
And
interesting. Very
then
interesting.
combine that with, at some point, I guess that's kind of what it is. Like a feedback loop of saying, oh, we did this, but like learning that when this happens, if I do this, it makes it better, kind of. And whether that lives inside or outside the database, I think in the end it's going to live somewhere in the space between. Sort of it's gonna be partially inside and partially outside to do that right.
Okay, great. Well, Magnus, thank you very much for your insight, and this was very interesting. Thank you very much for taking the time. And to our audience, if you have any suggestions or questions, send us an email to autonomouspostgresql@dbtune.com. Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Thank you, Mark.